By placing mental events firmly in the realm of the supernatural and ensuring they have no effects, they're insulated from any sort of study or analysis. And yet this impenetrable barrier of uncertainty ultimately suffocates epiphenomenalism. Not only can it not be proven wrong, it can't be proven right. It makes no predictions, it's guaranteed to never make any predictions, and it freely admits to this, almost as if it considers this a virtue. And why shouldn't it cling desperately to that? The only thing epiphenomenalism can do is taunt us with, well, you can't prove me wrong, as there is absolutely no evidence in its favor. That's because there cannot possibly be any evidence in its favor. It is utterly incapable of standing on its own merits. It has no merits to stand upon, and it never will. And in spite of all this, it steadfastly refuses to recognize that any sort of proof is impossible in the very system it has constructed. So I must ask, why? Having defanged these supposedly supernatural mental events so thoroughly, why do epiphenomenalists insist on separating them from the physical realm in the first place? Why do they go to such great lengths to render the supernatural entirely irrelevant, but refuse to take the final step of accepting that there is no supernatural, and mental events are physical events? They've already made such compromising concessions, it certainly wouldn't change anything. After all, it couldn't. If epiphenomenalism makes no difference, and by its very definition cannot ever make a difference, what does it even do? Nothing. When you get right down to it, there's simply nothing there. It provides no illumination of the workings of the mind, has no possible utility, and it's just plain unnecessary. It amounts to nothing more than yet another invisible, incorporeal, unobservable, undetectable dragon in the garage, floating beyond space and time. Why should we believe this dragon even exists? There is no value to be found in epiphenomenalism, and when confronted with an unproven, unprovable assertion so fundamentally flawed it verges on incoherence, we should not hesitate to reject it outright. At this point you might be wondering, just why do I oppose epiphenomenalism so forcefully? If it is indeed so utterly useless, why am I so bent out of shape about it? Though it may be useless, that doesn't mean it's harmless. Useless concepts can become surprisingly harmful when widely endorsed, and as I mentioned, epiphenomenalism has no shortage of supporters, whether they know it or not. Acceptance of its tenets entails various logical consequences, not only the possibility of zombies, but also the hard problem of consciousness and the explanatory gap, which assert that subjective experience can't be explained solely by the mechanisms of the brain. The problem of other minds, which asks how we can determine whether other people are conscious or merely zombies. And the inverted spectrum, that is, a precise physical duplicate of yourself who, unlike a zombie, has the same consciousness as you. However, the colors they see differ from the colors you see. For instance, they experience the chartreuseness of pink. Regardless, their behavior is exactly the same as yours, because their brain is identical. Now, I must admit to having experienced some confusion over the direction of causality between epiphenomenalism and its attendant issues. How strangely appropriate. You see, I thought these problems result from accepting epiphenomenalism and believed their obvious absurdities pose a challenge to its validity. I stand by that assessment, but that isn't how these issues were meant to be used. Rather, they are intended as arguments in favor of epiphenomenalism, or at the very least against physicalism, the view that all things are physical. This hadn't even occurred to me, as it would be entirely preposterous. Why? Because the premises of these arguments assume the validity of their conclusions. The zombie argument is typically formulated as follows. We can imagine a world exactly identical to ours, except everyone is a zombie, lacking consciousness but exhibiting the same behavior anyway. Because we can imagine this, it is possible that such a world could exist. If this is possible, consciousness must be non-physical in nature. Because physical and mental events behave this way, epiphenomenalism is true. Many philosophers attack this argument by claiming the zombie world cannot actually be imagined, or by disputing the notion that something is possible if it can be imagined. I'd rather focus on the conditions necessary for the zombie world to be possible. Such a world can only exist if consciousness is non-physical and affects nothing, allowing it to be added and removed without causing any changes. What view would best describe this? Epiphenomenalism. Stripped to its bare essentials, the zombie argument is revealed to be begging the question. If zombies are possible, epiphenomenalism must be true. If epiphenomenalism is true, zombies must be possible. If epiphenomenalism isn't true, the proposed zombie world isn't possible, and the zombie argument falls apart, along with the rest of these arguments. They all presuppose the truth of epiphenomenalism, and therefore suffer from the same flaw. The hard problem of consciousness is only hard if subjective experience really is something that can't be explained by physical events. The problem of other minds is only a problem if the presence or absence of consciousness makes no difference and is thus unobservable. And an inverted spectrum is only possible if physically identical people can have differing minds yet behave identically in spite of this. For these arguments to even have a chance at validity, epiphenomenalism must be accepted from the very beginning. If it is not, they lose their footing entirely. What truly bothers me about epiphenomenalism is that it offers less than nothing. It goes beyond mere failure and attempts to actively hinder our progress towards understanding consciousness. All of these arguments are bricks in a wall of ignorance, bearing the warning, you cannot possibly know such things, so don't even try. Lots of very intelligent people have been sidetracked into spending a great deal of time demonstrating that this obstacle is illusory, and explaining why these arguments are invalid and irrelevant. Unfortunately, their time has likely been wasted, as reason is toothless against the unreasoned and unreasonable.